I didn't find out for some time later that he actually chased us with a double-barrel shotgun that was loaded. It got to a point where he wouldn't have known which way I went, so he gave up at that stage. And I'm really thankful that he did, because I'd hate to think what would have happened to us.
Was he that sort of guy that you think something may have happened?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You're listening to Against All Odds, my face-to-face conversations with everyday people who inspire. Welcome to the show. My name is Odell Odds Harris, and I'm privileged today to have a very special guest on, my mum.
G'day, son. How you going?
I'm good.
So my name's Barb Stott Harris. Odell's wanted to get me on this show for about 1.5 years, but I've actually been avoiding it because I felt like I didn't really have anything much to say. But now that with all the stuff that's going on with abuse that's coming to the surface with women around the world, I just thought maybe it's a good time to share my story.
And hopefully help someone.
Yep.
I think you've really changed in the last probably 5 years and become dare I say it, a happier person. So I thought we'd talk about that, Ma.
Yep.
You happy with that?
Yep, sure.
Okay, let's go.
Okay, well, if we start from the beginning, like from when I was 7.5, my family immigrated to Australia. I was a 10-pound pom. My father was in the army. Before that, he served in the war. He was a very violent and controlling man. So my upbringing was quite... it was an emotional roller coaster ride, actually, because you just never knew what was coming next.
Well, give me some example of why. What do you mean?
Well, he'd be happy one minute, and then the next minute we'd all be getting a bashing. So I guess he had mental health issues, like a lot of soldiers who came back from the war at that time. So yeah, his controlling was to put you down. Like he would put all of us down. He put my mum down, but we're talking about me. So for my part, I was told from a very early age that I was useless, I was fat and I was ugly, and that I'd never amount to anything, all sorts of stuff, physically and mentally.
So physically wise, like yours were actual beatings, right?
Yeah, they were beatings.
Yeah.
And I felt guilty because being the only girl, my beatings weren't as bad as my brother's beatings, but they were still beatings. And I witnessed my mum, horrific stuff to my mum. Oh, like you said, son, I was happy smiling on the outside, but crying on the inside. But even when I was a kid, Dad would be doing this stuff and I'd always be trying to think, well, there's got to be a reason. There's got to be a reason why he's like this. But right from an early age, I just made up my mind. If I ever have children, I'm never going to be like that to my kids. I don't want my kids growing up like this. I decided that I wanted a close-knit family, a loving family, a family who supported one another, and didn't abuse one another.
How'd that work out?
Well, I had 2 tries and it didn't really work out, did it?
All right. Well, we'll get into that later. But
yep.
But
thanks for reminding me that.
All right. So you came out as a 10-pound pom.
Yep. So my introduction to Australia was I had an infectious disease when I arrived, so I was put in quarantine for about 3 months. So that was welcome to Australia. You're going to be on your own for 3 months at 7.5 years old.
What was that with?
I had scarlet fever. I don't know what it's called these days, but it was highly infectious.
So you don't have any contact with your family for 3 months?
No, yeah, that's right. So that was that. And then when I went to school, my first day of school, I was greeted with a beating. A boy who was bigger than me, decided to have a go because he called me a pom, and I wasn't welcome, and to boot I wore glasses, so that made it even worse. Anyway, he gave me a bit of a thrashing, but I grew up with two brothers and a father who were always fighting and beating one of us. So, mate, I just got up and gave him a dose back, and I never had any problems after that.
Yeah, right. That's awesome.
Yep.
You're a bit of a fighter from back in the day.
I had to be. You had to be. It was either, like with the brothers, it was either both of them onto me, or it was like always, there was never harmony.
So you witnessed your mum being a victim of domestic violence. How did she cope with it?
She ended up having two, what they used to call breakdowns. I found her on the floor one day. She'd passed out and got taken to hospital, and they said that she'd had, I can't think of the word for it, but it's a breakdown.
Like a nervous breakdown?
Nervous breakdown, yeah, that's it. And I remember Dad crying his eyes out because Mum went to hospital, and then the day after she came back, he was bashing her again. So it was just like a cycle, and very controlling person. But I think, like with Mum, she was the same as me. She'd put on a smile because one of the things he always said, you don't air your dirty linen in public. So when we went out, everything was happy families. You know, we'd come home and we'd all be beaten again. Yep. But you didn't let anybody else outside the house know that.
No, but just like, you know, I guess my growing up, I'm sure you had some good times, right?
Yeah, we did. And my escape when I was a kid, you know, like I used to jump on my bike, take a sketchbook, make some lunch, and I'd go off. I'd get out of it for a while. And like in those days, I was only little, you know, and I'd just go off for hours and sit in a paddock and draw, come home. And so that was my escape, was my art. And that's what, you know, like I thought, okay, there were some good things about my dad. You know, he actually showed me how to draw, really. And like you said to me, you know, you've got music and you've got art. Well, Mum was a beautiful singer, but never heard it very often, you know, because she wasn't happy very much. So when I heard it, I used to love it. And we had some good times, you know, there were some laughs. Actually, I was the one, you said that I laugh a lot, and I think a lot of it is a nervous laugh, or was a nervous laugh, and my way of coping. But like if things were going down at home, we'd be sitting around the dining table, and if I knew something bad was going to happen, I would end up getting the old man laughing. I'd have everybody laughing, and then he couldn't hit anybody. So that I was the little intervener with my laugh. Okay, so everything was going along as normal as what I knew it until the day before my 14th birthday. And as a kid, my job was to take the dog for a walk, and it was always at night, and I had to do my homework first. So sometimes it'd be 10 o'clock at night, 10:30, and I'd be walking around in the dark. So this particular night, I was set upon by some young men and raped day before I was 14. So that's when my awakening came. I was too scared to tell anyone. I was too scared to tell my father.
Did you? It's a big thing just to gloss over. Did you know these people?
I did know them, yep, except for the guy who raped me. I didn't know him, but the other guys I did know.
And they just cornered you and it happened?
Yep. By a dark park. And of course, like everyone in the district knew the dog was a beautiful, docile dog, so there wasn't going to be any trouble from her. I can't remember their names. There was a family, and there was a few of them were brothers. I had to walk home after that had happened, and I couldn't tell anyone about it. So I held it in for a long, long time. I actually didn't tell anyone till probably 10 years ago, maybe. I was too scared to tell my dad because I thought he'd beat me. He used to had a habit of, if anything happened to you, it was your fault. So then he'd give you another one just to make sure you learnt your lesson.
Surely he would have that wouldn't have been the case, would it, for this?
I think it might have been, because like if a boy spoke to me, he used to call me a slut. And it was just someone who I went to school with. Say hello to me, and then he'd take me home and give me a bashing and tell me I was a slut. Hard man, Odell, hard man.
So how did you cope with that?
You just you try and put it behind you and get on with life. Domestic violence and abuse was all such a part of my normality, that it was like just a follow-on from that, I guess. I felt like I was nothing, worthless, and all the things that I'd been told I was.
So you think it's really important for people to...
I do. So I actually think it's really important to raise the issue and encourage people that if things like that do happen, and it's like you say in your podcast, son, there's always someone who will listen. But when I was growing up, you didn't know there was always someone who listened, because kids weren't really taken seriously in those days. You know, if a girl said stuff like that, or if a child said so-and-so was abusing me, they weren't believed a lot, Odell. So you had all that to deal with. I've done a lot of soul searching over the past 55 years, Odell, especially the last 5 years since your stepfather and I separated. And I can honestly say that a lot of my issues, my low self-esteem, my lack of confidence goes back to that particular moment, that thing that happened. Because at that time, there were no services to go to. I didn't know, that you could speak up. And I think it's really important for people to know about these things. I've put up with a lot of shit, and I just didn't know who to go to, who to speak to. But I'm still smiling.
You are, Mum. Well, I actually didn't know that about you.
No.
So, yes,
well,
this is a an emotional interview for me, as well as you, I think.
Yeah, it's not easy.
No, it's not easy.
Not easy to sit and talk about these things with your son.
Yeah. Give me some examples of some of the shit you put up with then.
Well, some of the shit I put up with was your dad. When I first met him, he was singing. I'd never met anyone like him. He was so different. It was like, it was exciting. I was this kid who just left home. I wasn't a kid, actually. I was about 25, but I'd just left home and I was spreading my wings, met this guy. He had charisma, and he hooked on to me and decided to come home and live with me, and I didn't know how to get rid of him. We had some good times. We had some fun times. He was wild. He was different. He wasn't anything like my father or my brothers, as far as I knew. I guess they always say girls like a bad boy. They like the bad boys, and I suppose I'm no different. I was attracted to that wildness, but that bad boys have got that name for a reason. They're bad boys. And later on, as things progressed, I realised that he had a drinking and drug problem, and it just developed into, like, he was a hero. I felt safe going out with him. He was the man. He was, and if anybody mucked up, he'd sort them out. He'd bash them up, and then he'd come back, and we just continue partying, and it was great. I was there walking around with him, feeling really proud because this was my protector. Unfortunately, things took a turn for the worst as the years went on, and he eventually turned that, violence towards me. Well, that led to me, when you were just a bub, he was quite violent with me one night, and you were 9 months old, and I just decided, well, I don't want to bring my son up in this environment. That's when I decided to leave. I packed up he went to work in the morning. I packed up the car, rang my boss and asked if I could have my pay, collected my pay, and then drove off into not the sunset, but the sunrise, basically. And just got us out of there.
What were you fearful of?
Well, when you're feeding your son and a man comes up and bashes you in the back of the head, you start becoming fearful. I was frightened for myself, and I was frightened for you. I could just see my childhood coming back all over again. And I thought, no, I'm not having this. This is it. I've got to break the cycle. I didn't find out for some time later that he actually chased us with a double-barrel shotgun that was loaded. But I actually took a turn. It got to a point where he wouldn't have known which way I went, so he gave up at that stage. And I'm really thankful that he did, because I'd hate to think what would have happened to us.
Was he that sort of guy that you think something may have happened?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And then what happened?
Well, I was on my own for 3 years, and then I met your stepdad and thought that things might be different this time around.
Well, they were. He wasn't physically abusive to
No,
you.
no.
Because I've told everyone how you met my stepfather, and I was run over, and because I remember we were living in council flat, right? You know, everyone on the block would spoil me.
Yeah, they did. You were a little charmer even then. Even though you were a little shit as well sometimes. Actually, I really enjoyed that place. It was good. It was a family, and we all looked out for one another. But this particular day, you chuffed off down the row, down to see your mate, get some biscuits, and you were run over by a drunk driver, a lady. And by the time I got there, obviously they'd got the car off you. You were fine, but your little go-kart was mangled, and it was like a miracle, because you should have been killed, really. That's not a funny laugh. Your stepdad, when the police were called, your stepdad was the first one to arrive on the scene, and it was like this hero man, came in to save everybody.
Yep, and he became my stepfather.
He became your stepfather. Yep.
I talked about my stepfather in my episode, same as I spoke about my real dad, as I said. Was that a fair description of my childhood?
Yeah.
Yep. Why did you put up with that?
I didn't, at that time, know that wasn't normal. I kind of did, but I didn't know what else there was. And I attribute that to that time when I was 14, when I just became very insecure and had absolutely no confidence in myself to actually stand up and say what I thought or make a stand. But in the last 5 years since I've been on my own, I've really found myself, Odell. I found out who I am, and I'm comfortable with who I am. I'm comfortable in my skin. Like I've struggled with weight issues for a long, long time, and now I've learned to accept myself in whichever shape or form I am. And a lot of women struggle with this. It's only taken me 69 years to realise that I'm okay.
I think it's really important for people listening that you tell them how you came upon that sort of epiphany or, realisation that's been responsible for a lot of the way you've allowed yourself to be treated, for a lot of, the emotional things you've had to put up with in your life.
I think through counselling, first off, when you start telling your story, and with some help from those counsellors to like guide you through.
So you sought professional help then, did you?
I did.
How did that come about?
After your stepdad left, I was just in a hole. I felt totally worthless, absolutely worthless, and I contemplated suicide a few times.
Really?
Yep.
Suicide?
Yep. I was at the lowest of the low. That's when I knew I needed help, Odell. I needed to go and talk to somebody.
Why don't you talk to me?
I don't know. I didn't talk to you or Jess. I don't know. I think I was just feeling like I blamed myself for everything. I thought it's got to be my fault. But it wasn't until I met this lovely lady who was the counsellor.
Do you think if you had come and spoke to me then that I would be accepting of what was going on?
You're very protective of me, Odell, and I was a bit worried what might happen. And probably embarrassment as well. You don't want to admit to your kids that you were contemplating topping yourself. I found help through counselling. Also, I was offered a job where I was actually doing art therapy with people with mental illness, and that the art has always been there for me, and I didn't realise that it was actually a therapeutical tool that I was actually using for myself until I started working with these other people, and how important it is. I was working with people who had mental health issues, people who were suicidal, and like I'd been suicidal. And then all of a sudden I was confronted with people who were actually a lot worse off than what I was. Well, I considered that anyway. And I was able to, in several cases, help them through the art, through them being able to express themselves through art.
What message do you want to give listeners?
That there's it's like you say in your podcast, there's always somebody out there who'll listen. And that's one thing that's one of the reasons why it's taken me this long to come on board. It's because I really feel like from listening to the people you've interviewed and their stories, and like that guy who's changed his donor status, you can make a difference. You can actually make a difference by telling your story. So, and it is important. My story is important as well. But I've only just realised that actually I do have a voice, and maybe I can help somebody. So, and it doesn't matter if you're 69 years old, you still can find yourself. You still can change your life.
Well, thanks, Mum.
Pleasure, son.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the show with my mum. It was a difficult one to do. And if you enjoyed it, please pass it along to someone. You can also help the show grow by giving it a rating and review on iTunes. And I appreciate everyone listening. Remember, everyone's fighting their own battles. Until next time, stay humble, stay kind, and I hope you stay smiling. Odds out.